This is my Spokane, the leader and the founder of Church Governance Solutions. Today I want to deal with common causes of questionable credibility of church leadership. Common causes of questionable credibility. Questionable credibility of leadership in churches. And I want to speak about this because it is very important that every church leader becomes credible. Every church leader become authentic and looked up to. And everybody around you respect you likewise, because a church leader is somebody who represents what we call a moral compass. Is somebody who becomes sort of the light of the followers or of the congregation, and people look up to you if they are going to look at you like that. So therefore, you should be credible at all times. But there are things that cause credibility questions in church leaders. And I want to speak about those because that will actually help you, if you're a church leader, to avoid things like that so that you become credible and therefore highly looked up to and respected as a church leader. Because by so doing, therefore you become a role model to many. People can follow you without fail because people follow somebody who's credible, somebody who's respectable, somebody who is like a moral compass, as I've mentioned earlier. And that's very important. Now, some of these things that cause credibility questions on church leaders are like lack of clear criteria of appointing church leadership. Well, when there's no clear criteria of appointing church leadership in your church, you're going to cause credibility problems there, because nobody will believe that you've chosen the right people as long as there's no criteria. Now, I like advising people that there's a clear criteria of appointment of church leaders in the Bible. If you read the book of Acts chapter 6, particularly verse 3, you'll realize that there's a good criteria that is being said there, where it is speaking about church leaders should be people that love God. It must be people that are full of wisdom. It must be people that are full of the Spirit of God. It must be people that are available and therefore committed to the work of God. So we're looking at some criteria written down there in the book of Acts chapter 6 verse 3, and that actually gives us a clear indication of how to appoint church leadership. Now, as a visionary, if you appoint church leadership and you want your leadership to be credible, you must have a proper criteria that is known by all, and everybody can actually judge themselves against that. So that if anybody is having ambitions to be appointed as a church leader, they would actually align themselves to such principles of criteria and align themselves in a way that they can be appointed. And every time you appoint people that are in line with that criteria, nobody will question that, because people will know that this person is actually credible enough. This person is actually fitted or suited for that type of criteria, and therefore there's no dodgy appointment here. And that becomes very important. Secondly, high incidence of young, immature people opening churches and leading people is actually causing what we call incredibility or a lack of credible leadership. And that is why we have seen young people that are not matured, people that get born again today and next week open a church, people that are not matured in the teaching of the word, people that have not been discipled and taught, they decide to open a church prematurely. And when they open a church, remember, this guy or this lady is going to lead people. This guy or this lady is going to teach people the Bible that he doesn't know. He's going to teach people the principles of God that he himself is still a baby in. He himself is still learning. He himself is still wet behind the ears with. Because that's very important, that you mature first and become matured and knowledgeable about the ways of God before you teach others. And this is the reason why when we speak about discipleship, we speak about people that are mature to disciple people into the kingdom of God. You must look at this, because discipleship is like mentorship. So if you're mentoring somebody, you must mentor somebody in something that you're an expert of. In other words, something that you know better, something that you know better than your mentee. Because if your mentee knows something bad, not something that you're mentoring them into better than you, then therefore you cannot mentor them. You're not qualified to mentor them. And this is the reason why, as Church Governance Solutions, we are advising people to wait until they are fully matured before they open churches. And we have seen Jesus Christ himself, when he came on earth, he lived up until 30 years. That's when only that his ministry could start. Why? Because he needed to reach a maturity level whereby he will deliver. Remember, this was a man born of the Spirit of God. This was the Son of God himself. But he had to wait until the age of 30 for him to start his ministry, which lasted for 3.5 years. But when you look at it, you'll realize that he started it at a time when everybody would think it was late. But I want to urge you as a young man that if you are feeling power, feeling spirit-filled and excited about ministry, but please check if you're matured first, because that will cause incredibility. That will cause lack of credibility in your leadership. When you lead people and you yourself you are not matured, and that becomes problematic. And I want to urge you to wait until you're matured. The other thing that causes lack of credibility in church leadership is when you're turning ministry offices like apostle and prophet and teacher and evangelist and pastor into mere titles. And we've seen this happening, especially in our generation, whereby pastor, apostle, prophet are mere titles at the moment. They're actually being given to people that don't qualify. And people don't know that these are offices. These are callings. These are actually visionary callings that God has called the people into. If you look in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, it's God who calls people to become pastors. It's God who calls people to become prophets. It's God and God only who calls people to become evangelists. It's God and God alone who calls people to become apostles as well. So when you look at these fivefold ministries, it is not self-calling. It's not somebody who decides because you're full in the stomach, you've just eaten good food, and you think that you can be an apostle. And that is rendering this into such demeaning format that actually makes this to become only titles. But these are not titles, these are positions. They are not only just positions either, but they are actual callings of God. They are assignments that God called people into. So therefore, you must be an apostle because God called you into an office of being an apostle. You cannot just go around calling yourself a prophet until God calls you into the office of being a prophet. So this is very important. And these are the things that makes credibility to lack, and for people not to respect these offices. Lack of credibility in this, it becomes even more when people do call themselves names of offices as if they are just mere titles. So please be careful of that. Calling every praise leader, every Sunday school teacher, every youth leader, and even armor bearers by the office pastor, that's nullifying the office of a pastor. Because we have now started moving into seeing people calling every praise and worship leader a pastor. We are now calling every armor bearer a pastor. We are all now calling every leader of a department a pastor. And that is nullifying the name pastor. And as I've said earlier, that this is not just a title, this is a calling. So if somebody is not called into becoming a pastor, let's not call them pastors because they are not pastors at all. So please let us be careful of this, because otherwise then we are destroying the credibility of these callings of God in the people. Turning ministry work as easy business due to failure to make it in the labor market. We have seen people doing that. There are people that cannot be employed, people that are looking for work, they don't find work. They are not skilled actually to be employed, some of them. And they decide, wow, the easy way to make money is to open a church. We have seen this happening. whereby people that are unskilled, people that are not gifted, people that are not educated, people that are not qualified in anything, open the church because it's an easy way of making money. And I want to warn people that we cannot play with church. We cannot play with leadership in church and just go for money. And if you open a church because you think that it's a very easy money-making scheme, you are in a wrong place. You are in a wrong profession. So please be careful, because you cannot play with God. You cannot play with church. So therefore, please make sure that when you become a pastor, it's because you're called to become a pastor. And that becomes very important, because that's the only way that this is going to have credible leadership. The church can have credible leadership. But the church don't have credible leaders now at the moment, because we're having people that rush and open up churches just because they cannot be employed anywhere else. They don't have skills. They're not educated enough to actually work, but they are also not creative enough to do some business. They are not skilled in that. So therefore, church becomes very, very easy, because they are now going to rely on offerings. We know there are people like that, and that nullifies the credibility of leadership of church. And this is very, very important that we mention that the labor market is tough, especially in the days that we're living in. There are people that are struggling for jobs. There are people that are struggling, but that doesn't make you to rush, therefore, to go and open a church because of that. Now, I want to also emphasize this, that turning churches into money-making schemes, we've seen people doing that. Because when you turn a church into a money-making scheme, it actually nullifies the credibility of church leaders. And that is why many of the people in the world right now don't trust the pastors. They don't trust anybody who call himself a prophet. They don't trust anybody who call himself an apostle. So church leaders at the moment, they're not highly respected in the communities, because we have seen dubious church leaders. We have seen dubious people that call themselves church leaders, that are leading churches, of course, but people that are lacking credibility themselves. And that is why we are actually destroying credibility of church leadership. Finally, lack of accountability of church leadership. When a church leader doesn't have is not accountable, when a church leader is not able to submit to anybody, is not accountable to anybody, when a church leader is a law unto himself, that becomes problematic. And that is why you even find governments trying to step in to regulate churches. I'm not the one for regulating churches. I'm not the one who supports that, because a church should be an entity of God that is led by credible people, people that are called by God himself, and people that will be able to run the church perfectly and without any questions at all in the community. I want to emphasize this because it's very important that we understand that credibility is very important in church leadership. I want to end up here today. Your host, Maikona Spokane. Thank you very much for listening to us, and I hope that you've learned quite a bit out of this, and you'll make use of these lessons in your own ministry and in your own place, and make sure that you become a better person. Please don't forget as well to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you click that notification button so that when we post videos going forward, you are able to be notified of those, and so that you can actually follow us every time with the teachings that are great for you. May the Lord bless you, and allow me to say cheers for now.